And then, of course, in addition to that, mindfulness, we saw what was effective is questioning appearances. That is what I am perceiving. Does it really exist there from its own side? And is the beauty really there, or the ugliness really there from its own side? And also, where is the me that is getting angry or is having attachment arising? So if we question appearances, we can release that grasping, and this will also circumvent this process. Now, as we said, there's no problem with drawing lines and creating objects. In fact, we have to do that. If we don't do that, we can't function because there's no meaning. But again, the problem is we don't realise that that's what we're doing. We turn lines into boundaries. And very often, the very first line we draw in experience is we draw a line around here and we create the experiencer, because there's single experience. And within experience, there are two aspects or two parts. There's experiencer and experienced. And if we don't distinguish those two things, can't function. And I think a newborn baby is not able to do that. They have to learn to do that. So of course, we draw a line, we create me as we need to. But of course the problem is we don't realise we are creating the experiencer. So what we do is we grasp onto the me that we've created, grasping onto an independent me, and that's the beginning of this process. But that grasping to an independent me is completely irrational. For example, is this big? Big, B-I-G, big. Is it big? Depends, doesn't it? You can't have big and small. You can only have big relative to small. Like that, you can only have up relative to down, in relative to out. Like that, you can only have experiencer relative to experienced, subject, object, me, world, me, you. But of course, grasping onto this independent me and seeing ourselves as independent of what we experience is exactly like saying this is big. It's completely irrational, completely out of sync with reality. So what we are doing is we are splitting ourselves off from the experienced, and so we are completely out of sync with the interdependent nature of reality. So we are fighting against reality. And when we fight against reality, we have mental afflictions and suffering. We induce often a lot of suffering on others. And very often, in many of our behaviours, we have this self-grasping very strong. Me doing this, me going there, me saying that, this grasping, me. But sometimes in our behaviour, that self-grasping is not as strong. And that can often happen when we're more focused on the activity rather than the agent. For example, when we're absorbed in reading a good book, we're absorbed in watching an interesting program on TV, we're absorbed in solving a problem at work. On those occasions, we're more focused on the activity than the agent. And so that self-grasping tends to be less. And we know from our own experience in those occasions, things seem to go quite well. Time seems to go quite quickly. Why? Because we're not fighting against reality so much because of the strong self-grasping. And that's even goes to another level in people who have developed a high level of focus in their activities. For example, professional musicians, professional athletes, who've spent thousands of hours of training in their activity. So much so that when they engage in that activity, they often report they're in the zone or the flow state. And what they often report is there was no sense of me. There was just the music playing, just the activity happening. Not only that, but in that occasion, they report peak performance, optimum performance. Why? Because we're much more in harmony with reality. But of course, that's only due to increased focus, leading to temporary decrease in grasping. So of course, here, we are trying to not just temporarily let go of grasping through better focus, but eliminating grasping by realizing emptiness. And so if we can come to realize emptiness, we'll realize there's not one single boundary in the entire universe. And therefore we'll be able to cultivate boundless love and compassion for everyone. Because now there seems to be lots of boundaries. In particular, there's a very strong boundary between me and everyone else. There's me here and everyone else there, independent. And then, of course, when it comes to suffering, if there's suffering here, well, that's a big deal. In fact, I don't want it, and we induce more. If there's suffering out there, well, okay, if there's a friend, yeah, maybe I'll help them, but not my problem. Not my problem at all. That's me here and them there. Whereas, if you realise emptiness, and you realise there's no boundary, then whether suffering is arising here, in this body, or that body, equal. Suffering is arising, the natural response is compassion. How do we come to this realization of emptiness? In the text, when they describe the view of emptiness and try to help us to come to at least intellectually understand the view of emptiness, then often in the text they'll use a physical object to examine. In fact, in the classic text from great Indian master Chandrakirti from the 6th century, which is often the text that in some schools of Tibetan Buddhism we use to study emptiness, then he uses the example of a cart or a chariot. In the old days, the wooden cart. And he says, where's the chariot there? And he'll pull a wheel off and say, is that a chariot? Is that a chariot? Is this a chariot? Is this a chariot? Pull it all apart and go, where's the chariot? And then in the act of assembling, we can understand that there's no chariot to be found in the parts, and the only chariot that exists is the one we've created in our conceptual mind. So that's often used to help us to appreciate this view of emptiness. But then when it comes to meditating, it's very much recommended to start with person, me person. Because when we investigate, we can investigate anything. Body, mind, cup, anything. But person is recommended because that's something very familiar to us, and it's this initial grasping to me that starts this whole process going. And so there are a number of different ways of investigating this me, this independent me that seems to be here. The one we sort of more or less did last meditation, and the one we're going to continue to do a few times today, is an approach, I think, that is, well, it's the one that's most often presented for beginners, and it's probably the one that's more easy than some other approaches. So I'd like to just briefly present that, and then we'll do the actual meditation. And this is something that is very well described in a book called How to See Yourself as You Really Are from His Holiness Dalai Lama, which is the book I tend to recommend at the beginning stage of this practice. It's very well written, and I think it's also translated into Hebrew. So that would be a very good book to read. And the presentation is called The Four Essential Points. And using the terminology from His Holiness's book, the first point is what he calls identifying the target. The technical term in the text is identifying the object of negation. This is the most important point of the four, and this is the one where often people go astray in the practice. So what this is about is getting a clear picture of how we see ourselves existing now. That now we're grasping onto the me as existing independently. That's the me we're identifying with. That's the basis of our behaviour. So that's the me we need to have a clear picture of, because that's what we're going to look for. The me that we're grasping onto. So if we don't get a clear picture, then the search will be inconclusive. For example, using that analogy I brought up earlier, if we are to look for a person in a crowded room where we don't have a clear picture of what they look like, we can look all day long and never come up with a conclusive answer. So that's the first step, is getting a clear picture of this me that we're grasping onto. And the other place then where people go astray with this is that even though we may have a clear picture of the me, then often when we start the search, we turn it into an intellectual exercise. And then, of course, we always come up with an answer based on whatever belief system we might have. So we need to make sure that we leave the intellectual mind out of this search. Otherwise, we'll turn it into an intellectual exercise and not an empirical investigation. So that's the first step. The second step is again, using the terminology from His Holiness's book, limiting the possibilities. The technical word that's often used, the term that's used in the text is establishing the pervasion. But what this second step is about is, if there is an independent me, it must be findable. So the second step is about knowing where we have to look to make sure we've looked everywhere. So if this independent me exists, it can only be in one of two places. Either it's the same as the body and the mind, or different than the body and the mind. And if we can't find it in those two places, it does not exist. So that's the second step, is just knowing where to look to make sure that our search is complete. And then the third and fourth step is doing that search. And we can do that in either order. We can first search, is the me the same as the body and the mind? And so that's normally what we do. And the fourth step is it different than the body and the mind? So the same as the body and mind means searching the body and mind and looking for the me in the body and the mind. If we can't find it there, the only other place is it must be different than the body and the mind. Meaning, we must be able to take away the body and the mind and be left with the me. And if there's no me, if we take away the body and the mind, then it doesn't exist as different. And so if we've done that search, and then we get to the point of not finding, then we simply rest in that experience of not finding. Because that not finding is an experience of emptiness. But actually not finding here is actually realizing that the me is not findable. Because if we don't search thoroughly and we don't find, then that's not a realization of emptiness. For example, if I'm looking for a particular person in this room and I only look over here and I don't see them, that's not a realization that they're not in the room. I need to look also over here. But if I look here, they're not there, and I look here, they're not there, that not finding is a realization they are not to be found in this room. So that's why we need to do this thorough search. And then we just rest in that experience of not finding, and that's an experience of emptiness. And we hold that experience as long as we can. So now, emptiness becomes the object of our shamatha. We simply hold that experience of not finding. That is our object for shamatha. The longer that we can hold that experience, the more it will penetrate our mind. The more it will have a residual effect after the meditation. So this is what we're wanting to do, is to be able to hold that longer and longer so it has more and more effect on our mind. Any questions about the 4 essential points? Yeah.
Can you explain the first point? Because how can I get an image of something that doesn't exist? It was hard for me.
What exists is your grasping to that. That's what exists. What we're grasping to doesn't exist. But there's a very strong sense of an independent me. We are grasping to that, aren't we? When we're here, we have really a strong sense there's a me here. That is what we need to become familiar with.
Yeah, I understand, but for me, the moment I ask what am I grasping to?
No, it's not intellectual. You just...
I'm looking for it and then I can't.
Oh, you're looking down here? Yeah, we're not doing any looking here. There's no looking here. It's just resting in our experience of me. This would be like I show you a picture of a person. That's what you're going to look for. There's not anything intellectual there. You just look at it and familiarise. And then we do the search. So here, we're not looking for something. We are resting in the experience of me that we have right now all the time. It's right there all the time. Except, of course, if we're deep asleep or something, you probably don't notice. But now, there is a sense of me. Me. No? Particularly...
For me, the moment I look at the picture, it kind of fades away, so it's hard. Like, if I try to understand, okay, I usually feel there is a me, how does that feel like? And I'm like, wait.
Yeah, but here, we haven't started to look for it yet. So we're not looking. Don't look.
No, I'm trying to look at the picture.
Yeah, but we're not searching. There's no search involved here. Because already, if we're searching here, we're already down here. So we're not trying to find where it... we're not trying to see where it is. That's already down here. So you just... maybe that's what you're doing. You're already looking for where is this me. But that's already down here. So we just... and what we're going to do... what's often recommended to is that when we start this practice and we don't have this strong sense of me because we're relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, think of a situation where someone praised you or someone criticised you. Then we have a very strong sense of me. Yes, they're praising me. How dare they criticise me? Get familiar with that. Because that's what we're identifying with. But if we get more skilled in this practice and our mindfulness improves, then even if we're sitting quietly there, we'll notice that me. But as a beginner, yes, you're right, it's a little bit harder because our mind is not very clear and we're not very familiar with it. That's why I often bring on a little bit of a stronger sense of me. Look at that. And that's what we're going to do now in meditation, exactly that.
Two things that I noticed in the meditation when I was so one is I couldn't find the me, but there's just awareness.
Right.
So awareness, I couldn't find the me in awareness.
Right, so just stay there. Don't then go on awareness. Because now you've shifted your search from me to awareness. So a valid Vipashyana is to look for awareness, but that's not this practice.
I understand this practice, but
Right.
I'm just saying what happened.
Right.
We did with it. I understand what you're saying here.
Right.
To look for
A me.
something that
Right.
I'm holding on to. But if I do come to this just awareness, I couldn't find the me.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was this question, what is volition?
What is volition? Yeah, but then you've gone into another practice. So
I couldn't find, what it...
that could be a
It's
complete...
awareness, but where's the volition?
And that could be a completely valid practice to look for volition, but that's not this practice. So leave that out and do that as a separate practice if you want.
I don't know about it.
Yeah, but I mean, you could do that. You could do that. But here, it's like the example, we're looking for a particular person in this room and we don't find them, but then we go, oh, there's no table here, actually. I mean, then we're doing something else. No? So we want to stick with what we're looking for and not go, oh, yeah, what happened to the table? There's no table here. So then we're doing something else. I mean, of course, you can look for a table in the room, but that's not what we're doing. So leave out all of that.
So if it just comes, I look for the me, I don't find it.
Stay there. Stop.
That's it.
Stop. That's it.
So
Don't go into something else.
I felt in the meditation like the me was moving, like how you describe the body and the mind. Because if you were talking about the body, then I felt like I was moving. The me was moving in the body, noticing where the body stands, and then relaxing it, and
Right.
same as the mind.
Right, but we're looking for the me that we're identifying with. And the one we identify with doesn't tend to move. But then when we look at the basis of me, and the basis is moving, then of course the sense of me moves because we're looking at that basis. But that's not the me that we're identifying with.
What's the basis?
The basis, the body and the mind. So that's why we need to stick with this. It's like, again, I give you a picture, I say, look for this person in the room, and then you start looking, and then you see someone else and go, oh, that's very interesting, that person there, and it seems to be different, and so then we're doing something else. So we stick with what we're looking for.
Also, about the awareness, like I identify with the awareness on the other exercise.
Right, so that's
So
what we're
that's
going to
it.
do
I found-
tomorrow.
No, but-
Tomorrow's practice is look for the awareness.
But on the other, on the other meditation that we did today, it's like, who is the me? Where is the me? Okay, and I found it.
You found it?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
like I found it. It's my awareness. It's the awareness.
Hang on. You are your awareness. Does that make sense?
It's like I
How can
feel
you can't be something and have it. So it's actually logical to say, I am my awareness. Doesn't make
the
sense.
awareness is me.
But you said my awareness.
Okay, I feel it. The awareness is me. That's
Is it?
what I felt. That's what I
So,
felt.
how tall are you?
The awareness?
No, you. You said your awareness is you. Same. How tall are you? How tall are you?
The body is.
No, you. How tall are you?
You, me?
Yeah. No, how tall are you? 1 meter what?
The body?
No, you. How much do you weigh? So if you find something that's you, it must have all the characteristics of you because it's you. I think awareness is not 1 meter, whatever, 75 or 80, is it? So you can't be awareness. And also, if you have awareness, you can't be awareness. Impossible.
So what is the awareness here?
Well, that's what we're going to look at tomorrow. That's tomorrow's exercise. So we're not interested in understanding awareness here. We're interested in understanding the person, how the person exists. So again, don't go off into another practice and going, oh, I found some awareness, that's me. Because we're not looking for awareness today. We're looking for the person. Tomorrow we're going to look for the awareness. So wait till tomorrow, then look for the awareness and see what you find, if anything. But today we're just looking for the person.
When we did it this morning, I couldn't find this kind of me. I couldn't find it anywhere. And then I had, it was like very strange. I had maybe it's, now I understand, maybe it's like, I had like goose skin.
Yeah?
And a lot of light, and it was funny, it was strange, and I wanted to stay there. And maybe that's, I don't know.
I'm going to talk about this after meditation. So let's actually do the practice, and then there's a lot more to talk about this meditation, and we'll do that after. But let's have a little bit of a taste of it, and then we can continue our discussions. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them.